Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Breaking Into Cybersecurity. Our guests right now have some technical difficulties working their way in, but in the meantime, I just want to thank you all for joining us. I'm wearing red, not only due to the season, but to remember all those deployed. The other thing, if you're joining us on LinkedIn for this live conversation, we do have chat and questions and answers available. If you are joining us on YouTube, there's also live chat and question and answers available. And for those joining on podcast, this will be a audio only after submission. For those on YouTube, thank you very much for subscribing and hitting the notification button. In the meantime, one of the concepts that I wanted to talk about is, what do you look for in your next role? I think oftentimes, oh, there we go. I'll bring on our guest right now.
Hello
Hey,
there.
Brian, and thank you very much for coming on. That is the interesting part of having a live show, is that when things don't work out amazingly perfect, everyone can see. But thank you for continuously trying and for coming on. So tell us a little bit about your background and how you made it to cybersecurity, because really this is just a conversation between me and you about your path and how you got here.
1 second. I really like your hat. I also have a hat. Can I put mine on?
Sure.
Okay.
You could go put on your hat. So in the meantime, while Brian goes to put on his hat, one of the things to look for that I was talking about with regards to your career is really what makes you happy. So cybersecurity is a really broad field. Many of us have come from different aspects of IT, or in Brian's case, straight from when he was a student into some aspects of cyber. So we wanted to hear his story. What got you into IT and cyber in the first place, Brian?
So I was always passionate about helping people. Initially, I wanted to try to help the world by pursuing a career in medical. Specifically, I wanted to do dental, and then I wanted to specialize in orthodontics. However, I'm a first-generation college student, so I was the first in my family to go to school, which means that it would have been a lot of investment and cost for myself. So I decided that a career in the medical field might not be as rewarding as something more practical like technology. And so, given that I wanted to help others, I found a way to enter technology, and I started out pretty much, in help desk, customer service, troubleshooting type roles. And I did that for the duration of the time that I was in school, which is about 6 years. And I was really fortunate to land my first internship with US Foods. It was out in Arizona. And then I was really lucky to land a second internship in my second to last semester in university, finishing up. So it was really just kind of trying to hit the ground running and just to establish myself that I can at least mingle with customers and keep the business running as usual, and produce a level of work that is acceptable for the business to continue. Given that I worked in kind of really large environments, the first one was a large university environment for over 23,000 students. Um, that kind of really exposed me to the interest in IT and operations. And then I was really fortunate to have served as not a board member, but an appointed board member for our student-run club, Cal Poly Fast, where I was director of operations for 1 year. And then the following year, I was also the co-director of blockchain research. And then for the final year, graduating, I was just a security researcher. I kind of tried to keep myself really busy. I did a lot of research on online forums, like what can I do to establish my career, or how do I get myself to the next step? And a lot of people just said to put yourself out there, make sure you have at least a little bit of technical background, and definitely try to demonstrate that you have some level of experience. And then I was just really lucky to, after graduating, I walked into a full-time role. Initially, it was a threat detection engineer, but now that's been changed to security engineering analyst. And I'm still currently there, and I've really hit the ground running. It's a huge environment. We've got almost 70,000 employees, and there's just kind of a lot to do. And it's interesting because I don't consider myself in, like, the fun sides of security, like, your penetration testing or your purple team, or, something more like strategized. I kind of just went in with a little bit of experience in compliance and operations. And then I'm essentially the one to kind of just keep the lights on for our company and our tools that we use.
So, but let's take a little step back before we talk about your current role,
Oh, okay.
and go to your time in university when you kind of made that decision that you weren't going to go down the medical route and you're going into IT. Was that before you got to college? Was that during college? Like, when did that idea form in your head?
That's actually a really interesting question because that was a crazy time in my life, actually. That was during my first year of university. So from high school, I transitioned straight into a 4 year. However, I was not really fully prepared to be there. And so there were like a couple of remediation classes that I had to take and a couple of things that I had to get out of the way before I could actually enter a university environment. And so during that time, I actually also discovered that I was diagnosed with inattentive ADHD as an adult. Most of my life, I was able to get by because I guess I was just highly functioning. But when I got to college, there was really something that was not being met. And I just went into a really bad phase for my mental health. And I really started to turn that stuff around. And once I finally had my diagnosis of ADD, I was able to take a transition from the university I was at, which was Cal State Fullerton. I transferred over to a community college, which was Mount San Antonio College. And then I think 2 to 3 years after that is when I got to Cal Poly Pomona. So really where it started was when I was in that community college system. And what motivated me was when I was at Cal State Fullerton, I saw that there was a computer lab and there were students working in the computer lab. And I would ask them, how can I get this type of role? And they were like, unfortunately, we only hire engineering majors. And I was like, okay. So I really used that as motivation to try to get something else at Mount San Antonio College. And I did get a computer lab technician role. It was under federal work study, and I did that for about 2 years. And then I really started getting into accessibility and compliance. I transitioned to another role at the same community college. And I did that for a little bit. And then finally, I transferred over to Cal Poly Pomona. And then about a year and a half into Cal Poly Pomona, that's when I started working for the e-learning department at Studio 6. That's more related to faculty support and technology support. It's not specifically like IT, but it was just a little bit more IT. So I tried to work for that role for another year and 8 months. And then finally, I got a contact to the IT help desk. I spoke to the person who generally recruits. I was kind of, what can I do to get in? Is there anything I can do to help? Are you guys hiring? And then they were like, no, 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 we're not looking. We only hire engineering majors. And I was really bummed out at that. But they saw that I had a background in accessibility and compliance from Mount SAC. And that's actually what got me into that role. So I guess what I could try to say if anybody's watching is just to really focus on your baby steps, take steps to steps on getting yourself where you want to go. You might not jump straight into cybersecurity right now, but be very diligent in what you do, and eventually you'll get there. And then also try to diversify what you're doing. Don't have all your eggs in one basket, if that makes sense.
So interesting. So you took that GRC route into it. What did you like about GRC that kept you motivating, even though you wanted to kind of be on that IT side in the beginning?
I'm not sure I'm fully understanding what GRC is. I think that sounds like something more in the compliance realm of cybersecurity. Is that what it is?
Yes, so GRC stands for Governance, Risk, and Compliance.
Okay, so yeah, I didn't really get to do that kind of work.
Hmm.
It was more accessible materials for students that would have, like a learning disability,
Okay.
or if they were visually impaired, I would have to make a textbook that would read from them, and the tools that we used was
Mm.
Kurzweil 3000. So my mistake if I wasn't explaining that enough.
Okay.
It was heavily focused on accessibility related to folk who might struggle with disability related needs.
Uh-huh.
So that was kind of like my first dip into what compliance was. You have to meet a certain metric, you have to do this process in a certain way to get the product to the customer, and you have to make sure that everything is, I guess, within compliance, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, Once I got into the more compliant stuff in cybersecurity, which is kind of what I do now, I think they just saw that I had a little bit of exposure to what compliance was, and that's kind of what steered me into where I'm at. So my mistake.
Okay.
I don't know much about GRC. It does look like a really interesting field, but I haven't had the opportunity to dip into it yet.
No, no problem. So talk a little bit in regards to your approach to job hunting from your last role and then to this role. Like, what was your process like? How did you approach your hunt?
Um, it sounds really weird, but it is quite like a treasure hunt. Like, you got to get yourself into the door, you got to find a way in. So I would say I used LinkedIn a lot to just kind of talk about my experiences while I was going through school and internships. I was definitely very vulnerable in a lot of the things that I talked about. I tried to be very practical in what I'm trying to do and what I'm trying to present myself online as. I definitely am not a perfect person, and I'll never be a perfect person. So I hope that helps others not feel as overwhelmed.
Hmm.
But it was a lot of networking. So if I saw someone in a role similar to what I wanted to do, I would connect in that specific geographic area.
Hmm.
Um, there were a lot of events that I would attend that were provided by my university, but unfortunately, I guess maybe I wasn't one of the best that they were looking at the time, and so I wasn't really able to get in that way by just shaking hands with someone in like a cold call. But there was a position, and it was in my current role as a threat detection engineer, and I was eyeing that position for about a year and a half. And I was very fortunate that I had a friend who was an intern at my current company, and I had asked him a lot about what he did and how he liked his internship experience. And based off of what he had explained, I really wanted to grab onto this one. And so, actually, as a backup, my internship that I was working at the time was with Citizens Business Bank, and it was as an information security specialist. And so my boss was actually going to bring me on full time, but it seems like there was an issue with the hiring freeze in that very moment. And so I got the approval from my other position that I ended up accepting. They had a job offer and everything. It was like the very first time I ever saw something like that. And I kind of talked to her about it, and I showed her what the amount of pay and what I'd be doing, and she just went ahead and let me know. She was like, "This looks like a good opportunity for you. I'm going to just ask you to go ahead and take it. And thank you for the work that you've done for us so far."
Oh,
So,
nice.
I've always had to keep myself in extreme modes of being busy. Just given my like living situation at the time with family, it wasn't really the best environment for me at home. But I think that's what really allowed me to have a competitive advantage against maybe a lot of other candidates. I don't have all of the certifications. I didn't have the best grades, but I did show them that this is what I did from this time to this time. And I think that they really liked what I had to offer, and they took a risk on me. And I'm really grateful.
So you mentioned that you have this drive to be constantly busy all the time. What does that mean? Like, what did you do for that?
Well, like, okay, so at the time, like while I was in school, I would work a morning shift from, like maybe 8 to 12, and that was during the help desk. And then
Hmm.
I would go to class for 2 to 4 hours, maybe like 12 to 3, and then I would drive out in the Inland Empire to my internship for the bank, which was kind of
Oh wow.
where I lived near my house. I
Mm-hmm.
was really lucky it was near my where I was living. And then after that was ended, I would go back to school and finish my night shift from 6 to 10. So I had to kind of get a lot of my homework done like in the morning time and then like in the
Hmm.
nighttime when I had that time from 6 to 10. I was working in the library for the help desk. And so I would just answer students' questions. If there was a printer that went out or went bad on the 6 floors of the library, we would maintain that. It was a very it wasn't a very intense role, but it was definitely relevant to what I wanted to do. It was a lot
Absolutely.
of
And
juggling, I guess. And my apologies if I said that I was kind of working really hard, because I know there's a lot of people that are probably working way harder than me right now. So I don't want to offend anyone.
well, I don't think you said that you worked hard, but you said that you were constantly busy, which I think there's a difference, right? Because if you could not be working but researching all the time. You could be tinkering
Yeah.
all the time. You could be doing different things. So that's why I wanted to find out, like, what did you do to um, gain that competitive advantage you felt you had when you were interviewing?
Oh, okay. So this is a lot related to more of the extracurricular stuff I did, like with the clubs on campus. On Cal Poly, there's three Pacific clubs. There's one which is Cal Poly Fast, it's forensics and security technology. Cal Poly Swift, which is students with interest in future technologies. And then there's Cal Poly MISA, which is, I believe, management, institution student association. So those were all three kind of related to jobs in InfoSec, jobs in IT security, cybersecurity, and they would have and hold a lot of workshops related to, like, for example, penetration testing, or they would have a workshop on Linux, or they would have a workshop on Kali Linux, or they would
Mm.
talk a little bit about Python, or they would talk about the impacts of a buffer overflow and why vulnerability management is important. We had some computer science students that would share what they know about their programming understanding and how they can use that and correlate it to malware analysis. So it was a lot of different kind of events that I would attend, like during the weekends that the clubs would hold on and
Mhm.
host. And then I would start to pick up on the jargon and the cybersecurity terms and the theory. And then also, I tried to pair that a lot with listening to podcasts. One of them I always talk about is the Cyberwire. I think that's very popular. Another one that I've recently got into and I really enjoy is the CISO series podcast. And I believe, Christoph, you also have a podcast as well, right?
Well, you're on it.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yay. I thought it was more like a YouTube segment,
Same thing.
but
We stream live to YouTube. We're live on LinkedIn, and then we post the podcast when you're done.
oh, okay.
So
um,
yes, we've been doing it for the past 3 years and sharing stories like yours to help inspire the next generation that's coming down. So earlier you mentioned that one of your intern friends at the company that you're working for told you about the role. Were they the one that introduced you to the hiring manager, or did you apply and that you got picked?
so with the role that they were working, they were more working with Splunk SIM tool development.
Hmm.
And they were kind of like to the left of what my current department is. However, he knew the manager who hired him. Um, I had sent out an email. I think it was like 8 at night in one of my programming classes. It was a web development class, and I guess so. He ended up being on the other side of the world, which was Japan. And so when he
Hmm.
got that email, it was actually the morning time for him. So it was like the first email that got to him. And then finally, he had mentioned, he was like, "I see that you've been really trying to get into this role. I'm going to go ahead and pass on your resume to the hiring manager." And then at the time, I guess it was just a leap of faith, a measure of luck, because they had an intern that they were intending to do the role that I'm doing now, but that intern decided to decline it. So I guess they needed to bring someone else on immediately. And yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say is networking is really helpful, but also try and do a little bit of your research in your adventure. But don't be too rude, don't be too invasive, and just always try and keep like a professional demeanor when you're engaging with others.
Did you discover the email for that hiring manager through like open source intelligence stuff that you found online, or did your internship colleague give it to you? Just
He
curious.
passed it
Okay.
over. Yeah,
Okay.
he forwarded me his information. Yeah, no. Yeah, I
Well,
totally hacked
there's
my way
different
in,
ways,
but
right? Yeah, no, there's
I wish
different
I
ways
was that
because
good.
some hiring managers might post their email on their LinkedIn profile, right? And if you know to look on their profile for their information, that's usually hidden, right? Until you
Yeah.
connect with them, it's still hidden at that point. You can't reach out to them directly via email. So I didn't know if
Yep.
that was an approach you used. So that's why I figured I'd ask. Okay, so you shift into this role. How do you get up to speed with it? Being, say, the first role doing something like this, what are the ways that you keep up?
So I actually thought that I was going to be a lot more worse off than I actually was, but um, I previous to this role, I was always working with different tools and technologies. They weren't as fancy as what you would see in like a SEAM or something like that. But I had a base understanding of like Microsoft Office. I had an understanding of ServiceNow, which is like a ticketing system tool. I had an understanding of like HP Service Manager, which is another system ticket system tool. I've always worked with GUI type applications in the computer since I was little, so I kind of know how to navigate and point around. And then I guess having that confidence of being on the phone with a customer and then being able to kind of like point and click, or to sometimes if I have to remote into their desktop to get them where they
Hmm.
need to go. A lot of the tool that we use right now is Tufin Orchestration Suite. It's a SOAR tool, and it's a lot of point and click. It's not really very much GUI. I mean, it's not very much CLI or anything like that.
Hmm.
So it was, since what I do right now is predominantly for firewall recertification. The way I started was learning how to assign a task, how to reassign a task, and then how to focus on updating the metadata. The business unit, they'll put in a firewall request, and then 1 year from that, the request will become a firewall recertification. That's where I have to step in. Our system will automatically generate tickets that become due for recertification 60 days in advance. We have a script that picks and groups a bunch of tickets, and then I have to, for that month, get all of those tickets assigned to the corresponding business unit. Um, on top of that, a lot of our firewall rules were not fully labeled properly. So I had to help a lot with the documentation aspect on it and getting the rules tagged with what we call is a GSI mnemonic that represents the system that the rule is related to. I guess starting out, it was a lot of kind of shadowing my boss and my lead and understanding how she communicates with the business units to get us to the next steps of getting these rules certified. And then from there, after a few weeks, I kind of took it on my own and treaded the water lightly. But for the most part, I understood what I was doing. I guess the role was considered entry level, even though I would see it more as junior level. Um, there's also trainings that are offered from Tufin, and I've taken a few of those, although I haven't had all of the time to. But right now, I'm actually completing 2 more trainings in Tufin just to kind of understand the unauthorized revision process a little bit better, because that's a little bit wonky, and my boss wants me to get into that in the next year. And a little bit more of change management related tasks.
Absolutely. And I love that you stepped up and kind of took it on yourself. And there's something to be said for doing documentation, right?
Yeah.
Everyone hates documentation, and
Yeah.
if you're someone that loves to document, like you'll be loved in every environment because everyone hates doing it, and they'll always try to push it down. And if the new person loves to do it, you'll end up knowing so much more of the system because you've been documenting it than anyone that's been there relatively close to you in the same span of time. So I absolutely love that. So we're approaching the end of the half hour. As you think about your journey to now, and you had to summarize your advice. Looks like you have a fan here, Brian Leon, saying hello. How would you summarize your journey into one piece of sage advice for someone that might be following in your footsteps that may or may not have ADHD? Like I know I have something similar, so I know what it's like to like constantly be wanting to do something. So like how would you summarize your advice?
Well, I wanted to first just take a second and talk a little bit about neurodiversity. I'm not fully attuned to the topic, but I'm aware of what it is. And I think it's really important
Hmm.
for companies to realize that some of their employees might have learning disabilities. That doesn't mean that their employees don't have talent, or that doesn't mean that their employees are incapable. It just means that they do things in a little bit of a different way. And that actually might help them get ahead. Um, this whole idea of diversity and having different mindsets, getting a task completed, I think it's really important that we embrace onto that, because those folks that can hyper focus and get, 1,000 tasks assigned in a matter of a few hours, that is beneficial. And those folks that might have to do a lot of manual work starting out, as they learn more about Python to get that automated, well, the fact that they're doing all of that groundwork, that gives them a foundational understanding of what is going to be required in their environment. Going back, sorry, I'm changing
No problem.
subject. If I could say one thing, it's to not be so hard on yourself, because I think I was really hard on myself in a lot of facets in my life, and it really impacted me in a negative way to not be as confident as I really should be, given that I've already done some stuff for so long. So just don't be so hard on yourself to where it can be volatile. If you are going to be hard on yourself, look at it with rationale and logic, and take your weaknesses and use that as an opportunity to be proactive in getting yourself to that more proficient level in whatever you might be lacking in.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Imposter syndrome is something that definitely affects us all. So, um, Brian, I want to thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate your advice for those that might also be following in your footsteps. And even if you're one step ahead of someone, you can help them. And I appreciate you coming on and giving back.